In Ephesians chapter 4, Paul talks about the importance of speaking truth in love, a command that challenges us to uphold the Word of God while extending genuine, Christ-centered love to one another. Earlier this year, 5 Grace Fellowship elders spent an afternoon discussing how Christians can speak truth in love regarding some sensitive topics in our present culture. These conversations occurred with 3 filters in mind. Attend. What does it mean to be present where people reject God's design? How can Christians engage without compromising our convictions? Approve. Does participating in a situation imply approval of actions that contradict God's revealed biblical truth? How do we honor truth while still showing love? Advocate. Are we being asked to promote or affirm something that goes against God's will? How do we stand firm without becoming unloving? Listen in and be prompted to think about how you can speak the truth in love while growing in every way into Him who is the head, Christ.
Ken, to kick us off, this is something that's very much in the news relative today, this matter of pronouns, where individuals choose how they wish to be addressed. This is often framed in the context we hear of this DEI, this diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly in workplaces, but can also be seen in friends and family members. So how should we approach this from a biblical perspective? And should we use people's preferred pronouns as an expression of our love to them? How do we apply God's truth, effectively navigating these things?
I think this falls into that second category of approval. And in my opinion, I believe that you will indeed be approving of what we'll call the transgender agenda if you agree to use someone's preferred pronouns that don't correspond with who they truly are. Remember, the prevailing principle is, as you quoted Ephesians 4:15, speaking the truth in love. And the truth in this context is that pronouns, even though they are based in language, language is based in reality. And pronouns are based on the common sense reality recognition that a person's actual identity is either male or female. And it has been that way for millennia. All languages have this. And so in order for me to bend that because somebody wants me to acknowledge something that is untrue, I would in fact be approving of their desire. And I think that would in fact be wrong. So I think what you've got to do is you've got to anticipate and you got to be strategic. You've got to be aware, especially in a work situation where your job could be at stake or you could be overtly offensive to a client or something like that. In that situation, I think you need to go the extra step in attempting to avoid using using pronouns at all about that person. Don't refer to that person with him or her, his or him or whatever it is. Just refer to that person by their name in a discussion. Refer to them, of course, by any name that they would prefer to be called, because a name is going to be just simply what they want to be called. That might be offensive, but really that's not the point that we're talking about. You got to be careful. If you slip up, you can just try to avoid it. Maybe don't say anything about it. Don't draw attention to it. Then if somebody comes to you and says, you misgendered me, or you misgendered your coworker, or whatever, then that's when you're going to have to step it up to the next level and perhaps have a discussion with them about that is not something that I can agree to do. And, it's going to be a matter of conscience in many cases, but in this case, I think it's not. I think this is a matter of truth or untruth, and we cannot embrace an untruth. Be civil, be kind, but you need to stay with the truth.
So would you ever preemptively go to them if you know somebody, let's say right now, Christians in that situation, they hear this and go, that sounds right. Would you say before it comes up, go to them and go, hey, I know you prefer this. I'm a follower of Christ. I feel like this is lying because it's not true. And then have that engagement before it comes up, or you slip and say something that's not preferred?
I think that sounds good.
Yeah.
And that sounds like it would be a really nice tactic. But I think, and I've had circumstances very similar. When you're that proactive, you end up getting yourself in trouble.
Okay.
And I think what I'm saying, it's best to avoid those troublesome situations by thinking about how you're saying, what you're saying, thinking about what you're saying and how you say it around your coworkers. And especially if you're talking about pronouns, it's how you're referring to somebody else. Yeah. And in this case, what you're really more worried about is not offending the person who wants to be named by the different pronoun, but it's offending that person who is going to take up an offense for them, right? That's the one you have to be careful about. And so if I'm going to refer to another person when I'm speaking to Larry, I would say, now, when I speak to Pat, when I speak to Dan, when I speak to Mary or whomever, and just try to use their name instead of pronouns in those cases where you know that might be an issue. And that requires you being informed.
And don't you think that and I agree with everything you said, but I think a more common scenario is where you are asked for your pronouns. In other words, I think it is wrong to state your pronouns when asked, even if you're using the right pronouns, because the whole impetus behind asking you that is the idea that the pronouns are flexible, right?
If you're not compelled to do that by company policy, I think it is a tacit admission. It would be approval that gender is fluid and can be changed to suit one's current state of mind rather than a fixed state determined by the creator. And therefore, you should not, as a matter of principle, participate in that cultural trend. I have colleagues that I'm working with that they do that. They put their pronouns on their LinkedIn profile. They put their pronouns on their email signature. I'm not going to do that. I'm not falling into that. If somebody then compels me to do so, I will have
it's time to push back a little bit.
I would push back on that and say that I am not comfortable doing that. I don't believe that is necessary. And if it's something where I'm going to have to take a stand, I'm likely going to have to take a stand.
Even if it's your employer that's requiring you to do that.
Certainly.
Well, they're essentially compelling you to participate in a lot.
They're asking you to be an advocate. Yeah. So you're moving from mere approval to advocacy at that point. So for example, if somebody has to have it on their email, if it's a company-wide policy, identify your pronouns, now all of a sudden it's more than anything, it's advocate. You're creating the false understanding that there are possible sexualities.
I would say it depends on what they're trying to do with the pronoun. Let's say, for example, my name is Pat. Okay.
Understood.
Yes. And it could be one way, it could be the other. We just don't know.
There can only be one.
It could only be one Pat. Yeah. This Pat. Mm-hmm. But no, seriously, if my name is
the name Pat is gender neutral.
Is gender neutral, Chris, Pat, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
I would ask them, are you asking me to put my pronouns on there because you believe that gender is fluid? Or you want people to make sure they know that if they are referring to me and they don't know me, that they know I'm male. In which case, I would ask them, can I simply put male on there instead of his, her, him? Okay. I would indicate that I'm a male. I'm a Pat. I'm a male, right? That type of thing. And if you do it in a respectful way, then you're more likely to get accommodation from an HR department, because they're ultimately not about usually this is it's not
always the case.
Not always the case. But HR departments are typically just trying to keep peace and harmony in a workplace situation.
Yeah. And a lot of times too, companies, I don't know if it's still as much now as it was in previous years, but companies are seeking to get high scores from like the Human Rights Campaign and people like that. Right. And one of the ways you get high scores is everybody sharing their pronouns in the emails and all that kind of thing, you know.
But it's important that Christians understand that we do want to speak the truth in love. This is not just a preference thing.
It's not. No,
it's not.
It's a lie.
If you participate in this, and I refer to Dan as a she because that's what he wants, I am participating in lying, and I am lying, and I am sinning. We've got to be clear on that.
I think so.
Now,
yeah.
I don't need to be a jerk about it, but it flies in the face of the God who created him. He's a male, and that's what it is. And it's a lie, and we just can't do that.
Because if we take the idea of, let's say somebody asked you to embezzle, you would say no. And they say, well, no, it's fine. The company's very generous and they would understand and they're accommodating. It's happened before.
Yep.
You would say, it's wrong. It doesn't matter what the position is. It's an issue of right from wrong, truth from error, unrighteousness and righteousness.
That's
so
right.
I won't participate.
And I think the principle, the biblical principle for how you approach it can be found in characters such as Daniel in the Bible and Esther. In the case of Daniel, having to go to the authorities and say, please let us, he did it with great deference and respect. Please let us eat this particular food and not the king's table. Feed us just vegetables. For Esther, she went to the king and she was very respectful and did a very dangerous thing, but took the risk doing it in a respectful way and was rewarded. And God blessed her efforts.
Well, you can juxtapose that with both of those scenarios with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who said, "Please don't make us worship the idol," and they got thrown into the furnace. So it's not always going to go well for you.
That's a very good point, Larry. And sometimes you're going to have to face the furnace.
Yeah. Let me take it kind of in a different direction, but somewhat similar. You know a man. I'm not picking you, but you've known him all your life for Ken, and you see him after a period of time, and he comes and says, "Hi, my name is Kendra." How would you respond? How would you react?
So this is at work, or is this just in life?
Just in life.
Interpersonal
Someone
relationship.
quote transitions.
Now it's not pronouns, it's
Now
just my preferred name.
Right. And Kendra now doesn't look like a Ken.
Correct.
Has gone through whatever gyrations there are physically, chemically, whatever. How do we handle those situations? Do we call them by their name from a feminine standpoint, if they now are identifying as a female?
If a person wants to be called a certain name, I know I went from Kenny to Kenneth to Ken, and those are the names that I prefer to be called. Obviously, it wasn't call me Kendra. I wasn't saying call me of a different gender. But I think that is a place where if a person wants to be called a certain name, I'm going to accommodate that person instead of just being provocative in that case. I would rather establish a relationship with that person, because it's not a situation where I'm going to lose my job or I'm going to set a wrong precedent by accepting that a person can become a different gender. I'm simply calling a person by a different name. And this, yes, it's uncomfortable, but this would be an opportunity for me to try to establish a relationship with that person and then speak of greater things. This is a small hill to die on.
But here's why. Because while names have some cultural definitions to them, they don't have a correspondent view to reality. They don't.
Not in our culture.
Anywhere. Pat could be a Ken, which is a non-challenging, could be a female name in another culture. It does not imply maleness. He implies maleness. So there's no deviating from that.
Correct.
So
There's
therefore,
only
I know
one
you and I
context.
disagree on this,
Yeah.
but I would
Somewhat,
also probably accommodate that person. Because
it's just a matter of being
is that
polite.
love?
Well, and I think it depends on the circumstances.
I do too.
At work, you may not even know what the person's name was before they transition, so you have nothing to fall back on.
Right.
Well, he said that I knew the
But
guy
if you know the
before.
person, or especially particularly, perhaps it's your son or your daughter.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're well within your rights to say, I'm going to call you what I named you.
That's right.
Agreed.
Yeah, and that's a different scenario than that person that you know casually at work.
And it could be even, you might even take that approach with a lifelong friend. Say, I love you enough to not help you participate in this lie.
Yeah, I think the really important thing is, because you'd said it's sin if you misrepresent truth, reality.
yes.
Correct? So that's why this is a very important nuance. Most people don't realize this. Grace Fellowship, we have Taste of Grace afterwards. There was an individual who has taken on a feminine personality, wears dresses, et cetera, they're a friend of somebody in our church.
They're male.
Male,
Okay.
biologically male, is going to come to the church. They came to the church, came to Taste of Grace as a male, as their biological sex, asked some of these questions, and I represented it similar to this, but I said it's not a matter of right and wrong in that moment. It's a matter of trying to help you understand in your confusion that you are a male and it's sinful to represent it any other way. So we talked about that, but I didn't go after them by going, hey, I understand you wear dresses. Right. I didn't do that because the goal was not to offend them, but to help them understand. Now, if after our conversation they demand that I say that, or our relationship is contingent on me saying that and accepting that, then there's a separation.
And you went out of your way not to be deliberately provocative.
I don't want to be a jerk.
Yeah.
I just don't want to be a jerk because Jesus wasn't a jerk. Right. He hung out with adulterers and tax collectors, sinners, and the religious leaders had the understanding of righteous people don't hang out with unrighteous. Well, because they had a particular brand of righteous. So if a Christian's thinking that, I can't engage with people, or I've got to hold them to account, I can't let them talk, or somehow I'm allowing them to continue in their sin, I would challenge that. Yep. Just because the life of Christ is, I think, the great leveler in that.
Yep. Good. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the next one. This one is for you, Pat.
Sure.
Again, a scenario that's becoming more and more common today. I know I have been involved in discussions about this, but it's this idea of a so-called gay marriage. Mm-hmm. As a Christ follower, should I attend such ceremonies? Why or why not? If a loved one is getting married and I choose not to attend, could that jeopardize my relationship with them? How can we navigate this challenging situation for both a biblical and conviction with both grace, truth, and love?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's very, very common. And I'll just cut to the chase. No.
Yeah.
No, we should not attend because participation in or attendance at, so you might be in the wedding party, which would be a level up, or you could be in the back row. Either one of those at such a union where there's two same-gendered people getting married would be endorsement or advocacy, plain and simple. And contrary to what you might think your attendance communicates, that in fact is what it communicates. So any attendance at a wedding, civil union, whether it's a big gala or it's a justice of the peace and two people at a courthouse in some small town is wrong, and it is sinful. And so it's not appropriate. The point to me to be clear on is this. There's no context where a Christian should attend such an event as this.
So you're trapped. You're an advocate, regardless of what you feel or think you are
advocate
portraying.
Or you're approving. I don't know if you're
both.
advocating it.
You're at least approving.
At least approving.
Yes, because you go to a wedding to witness the event and celebrate with the participants.
Correct. Because I'm not being vocal, but I am approving.
The difference is the nature of the event makes me an advocate.
I don't think it matters ultimately.
No, I would agree.
Or advocate, being an approval or an advocate of this is equally wrong.
I think it helps in explaining what a wedding ceremony is, because people have a tendency to think, I'm just there enjoying the time and want to support somebody. No, you're actually a witness to what God has designed, and I'm sure you're going to talk about that.
Yes, and you're affirming that these two people should be doing
this.
Come together to become one in every sense of the word, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and sexually. And that's just simply not possible as God designed it if there's not one male and one female involved in this union. It's simply not. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the cosmic, the eternal significance of marriage and what it means, it really can't be overstated. And for us to subvert that or pervert that or defile that by having two same-sex people enter into this marriage, civil union, whatever you want to call it, it just says there is no God. And we define what morality is and what's appropriate.
And there used to be times in which people would say, does anybody here have a reason to oppose?
That's right.
Also at the wedding reception, people touch their glasses. In other words, there is a tacit
couple is introduced, everybody applauds.
That's right. Yeah. And you stand when one comes down. So therefore, there is a dynamic when you think about it, whether it's becoming somewhat subterranean today in people's understanding. It fundamentally is a rendering from God on what He designed, not us. He created marriage, and so therefore we're either approving of it as He did, or it's not really a marriage. So you're approving of something that, to our last question, is going against reality itself, going against truth itself, falsehood. And that's why Christians need to think about it. And it's not made easier when public, very well-known pastors are recommending to a grandmother to go to a wedding
Yep.
and then bring a gift.
Because it could be a winsome way to engage and talk to the person on the flip side.
Yes, and I would say it's not a whimsome, it's actually a diluting of the gospel. When a Christian goes to that, you're saying this particular sin is not a sin. And so if you would oppose it at some point, let's say you're at the wedding and then afterwards trying to share the gospel, afterwards you go, by the way, whether it's 2 weeks or 2 years, by the way, this is wrong and it's sinful. Or you're giving the gospel and you called them to repent of their sin, like what? Like you think you're married to the same sex person. And they go, wait a minute, you came to the wedding.
Yeah.
And think about
Didn't
it.
you have a
If a
problem
person
there?
invites you to a wedding, what are they doing? Why are they inviting you?
Yeah.
They're
They wanna
inviting them
celebrate
because they
with
want
you.
you to celebrate with them. They want you to approve of what they're doing. They want you to be a part of that because they have an affection for you and know you have an affection for them.
That's right.
And so if I were to if I were to ask you, would you want me to come to your wedding if you knew that I was incredibly philosophically opposed to this marriage between a same-sex partners? No, I wouldn't want you to come. Typically is going to be the answer. So it's really pretty easy. You would, if you want to really know, ask that person who's invited you. Tell them, I don't agree with this. Do you really want me there? Now, it may be that a person's going to just
They
say,
may say,
yes,
well,
I
yeah,
want
because
you
you're
there
my
because,
friend or something.
but they're not really understanding what the reason is.
Correct.
And maybe they might even be wanting to get you to compromise.
Yeah.
And so I think
be a
you
hypocrite.
you can learn a lot by having that kind of conversation. Gently,
Right.
respectfully.
And then getting back to the other part of your question, there's going to be some cost you'll pay for this. I have not been put in such a situation, but due to my position on divorce and remarriage, which is pretty conservative, I have not gone to 2 different weddings of people that I cared for because they were previously married.
Heterosexual weddings. Right.
Heterosexual.
Yeah,
But
right.
they've been previously married. And I said, I cannot in good conscience go to this. I love you guys, but I will not be there.
Because I don't think you should be doing this.
And
Right.
it set the relationship back a bit. But ultimately it didn't badly, but it can. And we need to be careful because here's what Jesus says. It's pretty, we don't like to preach this very much.
Yeah.
Mark 10.
Yeah.
Don't think that I've come to bring peace to the earth. I'm not come to bring peace, but I'm bringing a sword. I've come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those in their own household. So if we hold the line and don't go to these types of things when we have a more progressive, I try to be as charitable as I can, as someone who doesn't have quite a high view and understanding of the significance of this, sibling, relative who does go and thinks we are,
We're the bad guys.
we're narrow-minded, fundamentalists, we're
Hypocrites.
hate-filled, we may end up paying a price for this, and we need to be prepared to do that.
But I think also we would be prepared to pay the price. Let's say we know that somebody is abusive. Let's say a male is abusive to a female, and we've talked with them about it. We're concerned about it. And then they say, hey, but could you please come to the wedding? I would be reticent to come to that wedding because I go, no, this is not something that I want to stand by.
Never previously married, a male and a woman, but the guy's abusive. I can't go to this wedding because I think he's going to.
We've had people come to. I had somebody come to me and say, "Oh, my daughter wants to get married in this church, and because I know you, she wants you to do to perform the ceremony." And I said, "No, I'm not going to do that." Well, why not? I don't even know them. I don't know anything about them. I don't know that I can approve of this marriage. I would want to have
some
counseling and
right.
conversations with them beforehand and make sure that they're candidates to be married. And they were highly offended that I wouldn't just
tacitly endorse it and approve it.
just cave in and do it, because that's the way our society looks at marriage now.
Yep.
And we have to hold the line because we're the last. I think we're the last line.
We'll be held to account.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you're not like ordering a burger. You're bringing 2 people together underneath a design particularly and specifically created by God. So when people come there and they, hey, why don't you do this? They're thinking just like ordering a burger.
That's right.
It should be delivered.
It's what the church
no,
does.
actually there's more to that. So like when somebody gets to the point they want to be married through us, through the church, we talk about counseling, we talk about this, and if they say, well, we're thinking about next month, we go, ain't going to happen.
Nope.
It doesn't matter if you're Moses and his wife. It's just not going to happen because we have to represent it in a way that's helpful.
Yep.
Let me throw another wrench into this. So let's assume it's a child that wants to get married to a same-sex person. You as the father, the husband.
One of our children.
One of
who
our
is an
children.
adult,
Okay, yeah.
not
Yes,
a child.
Excuse me. Yeah,
Not a
you're right.
minor.
Good clarification.
Just to be clear, you're right. Adults.
One of our adult children, right? Okay.
Pastorally, how would we deal with a situation where maybe the husband and the wife of the person that's getting married are differing on that? The husband says no, the wife says
The father and mother.
the father.
I mean, the mother and father.
The father says no, but the mother says, well, I don't want there to be any friction between him and us, and I think we should do this. How do we counsel a father to
There's
talk
gonna
to
be
his wife
some-
about this situation?
Some frank,
Yeah.
tender, patient,
Yeah.
loving conversations
Right.
between that husband and his wife.
And you have to pastor them through that. But I think the bottom line is you have to let them know that, I would say for the elders of the church, but for the Scripture and per our view of the Scripture, if either one of you goes to the wedding, you are sinning.
That's correct.
And we are asking you as your elders not to do
And
that.
it will cost you. You
Right.
know it's going to
Yeah.
cost you. Your
Yeah.
son's going to be bitter and ticked off at you maybe forever.
But this is the cost you're talking
It
about.
is, man, and you are a light on a hill.
Right.
He sees haters, narrow-minded bigots, but you are a light. It says in John, where Jesus says, I am the light of the world. I've come into the world and the darkness hates it. They're going to hate that light. Now, let's not be jerks about it, but
People love darkness rather than
they
light.
do.
Here, you got okay, this is a line in the sand. I will not cross that
Yes.
line. I get that. Is there a way that you can approach that line in the sand? Is there a wrong way and a right way to approach that? And I think perhaps a wrong way is, I absolutely will not, kind
Just
of
railing on
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
and-
Yes.
that
It's how
kind of
you
thing.
respond. Not
It's
that you respond, but how.
anger,
Yeah.
violence, or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
Perhaps a better way to approach that line, which you will not cross, is to appeal to that person's sense of love for you, that person's respect for you, that person's respect for your values. Perhaps even if they don't share your values, you can go to them and say, look, you know that this is a value that
Yes.
I have. And you are putting me in a situation where I'm having to compromise or you're
Having to
asking me to
violate my
compromise
conscience.
that would
Yes.
violate my conscience, would violate what I think is right and wrong. Do you really want to put me in that circumstance? I'm very uncomfortable in this circumstance. I'm asking you, I'm pleading with you, I'm begging you, please help me out here.
And as we kind of wrap this one up in regards to the father and the husband to the wife,
Right.
this is where, by God's grace, if you've been building up relational capital with your wife for the previous decades, and she trusts you and she respects you, because this could be the biggest ask you'll ever put on her. Honey, I know you want to go. I want to go because I love our son too. We cannot because we love Christ more. You got to trust me. And if you don't have any relational capital with her, or it's in low, that's going to be a tough sled to pull together.
And don't compromise, because you want to stand, you want to give truth and love. And it's not based, truth and love in Ephesians 4, it's not based on how somebody receives it. It's about your motive.
That's right.
In what is given, what is truthful.
We need to define love, right? We got to be careful. The world says love is that which makes much of me, that which affirms
makes the other person
me.
feel good.
Yeah,
right?
biblical love starts with God, and it does what is in the best interest of the other person.
Correct.
So if my son, who is 3, is about to touch the hot stove, it's my best interest to snap his hand out of the way at the last second rather than letting him burn 4 digits. He won't receive it as loving. He will cry and he's going to fuss. But I've loved him well. And to the same example would apply to my adult son who wants to get married to his boyfriend. And I'm not going to slap him or yell at him, but I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to protect him and give him the counsel that is best for him and leads him to the Lord. And it's up to him how he receives it.
That's true.
Just one
Good
last point of distinction. There would be no difference in how we would approach this if it was like an engagement party or if it was
Correct.
That is correct.
Anything
ceremony.
that facilitates the wedding.
Right, or
Yeah.
any kind of reception later
That's
at
right.
a later
Correct.
time or date.
Same idea,
Yeah, same
bro.
idea.
Yep.
Anything
Okay.
that celebrates.
Okay, great. Well, that's good discussion, fellas. Let's go to the next scenario, and this is for you, Larry.
Okay.
This may come up somewhat similar to what we've talked about here, but assume as a parent you have a gay son and his boyfriend are wanting to come visit and want to sleep in the same room while visiting you. How should we respond to this situation as Christians, again, balancing love, truth, and biblical convictions?
Yeah, and I think it is very similar to some of the discussion that we just had, because I'm going to say that the bottom line answer is that you should not allow them to do that. And I think that because you're being asked essentially to, at the very least, facilitate their relationship, if not approve of their relationship, which is a sinful relationship. And so, as Christians, we're supposed to not only avoid sinning ourselves, but we're also supposed to avoid helping others to sin.
Right.
Facilitating sin is not something that we're allowed to do. Again, like we said in the marriage discussion, it's not loving to help a person continue to rebel against God. And the Bible has very strong words for people who do that, right? It says, Isaiah 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. And so again, going kind of back to our marriage discussion, I think we sometimes forget how serious this is, right? What marriage represents and what the sexual activity within marriage, which is good and right and beautiful and was designed by God, is meant to do. It's meant to represent Christ and His church. It is meant to be a means through which more image bearers are created, the creation mandate, all of those things. And so when you take the sexual relationship out of that context and you put it in another context, particularly one between two people of the same gender, then you are essentially blaspheming God, blaspheming Christ. And so I would not want to put myself in a position of helping to facilitate that. It says in Romans 1:32, and this is a passage where Paul has dealt with homosexuality. Though they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. So again, I would say this is like the wedding thing. You would be sinning if you facilitated this. So
would there be a difference if it was your son and his boyfriend, or if it was your son and his husband?
Or your son and his girlfriend.
I don't think it would.
I agree with you. I just want
Yeah.
to make it sure. Or your son and his girlfriend.
Well, I think in all cases you should say, no, you can't share
Correct.
a bed in our home. And no, it doesn't make a difference if it's two men that claim to be married versus two men who are just in a relationship, because that's really not a marriage.
That's
I
correct.
like how
as we
you
talked
said
about.
claim to be married, because we do not, that's another thing. We cannot give up on that.
Right.
Marriage
And
isn't from the
give in.
state. Marriage is from
Correct.
God.
Yeah, and
Right.
give in and start calling that a marriage. I think that's going to be an offensive thing for
In and
many
of
of us
itself.
in and of
Yeah,
itself,
yeah.
is just basically saying, I don't believe that this is a marriage.
No.
Right. And something people don't talk about too much, because I think it gets into some, delicate areas when you do, but it is not possible for two men or two women to become one flesh.
It's not.
It's not possible physically for that to happen. A marriage like that cannot be consummated, as the way it
correct.
used to be described. So,
Here's it. So,
okay.
but assuming you're the dad, but Dad, it's not like we're going to engage in sex. We only have one bedroom and there's only one bed. We're just gonna do that. We're just gonna sleep, and we're not gonna touch each other.
We've still got the air mattress. Okay. So I would, even if they're telling you we're not going to engage in sexual behavior, sharing the bed is a level of intimacy that is not allowed between two men or a man and a woman who aren't married.
That's
I wouldn't
correct.
do that for a man and a woman.
That's right.
Who weren't married to each
we're
other.
not going to have sex in the bed. Well, right. Yeah.
Doesn't matter. That's the point.
Right,
It doesn't
doesn't
matter.
matter.
It's
Right.
what it implies.
Right, what it implies. And so what should you do? Again, with the marriage thing, I think you should say, you and your friend are both welcome to spend Christmas with us or whatever it is under these circumstances. And, they may accept that. They probably know how you feel already.
They should.
They should.
They should. If you've done something wrong if they don't, right? They should probably, and then you have to let the chips fall where
They might get a hotel
Right.
instead, and which would be more distant than
And
a
then
roof,
come-
or they
and-
might not come at all.
Correct.
Again, we might pay the price.
Again, you do the right thing and you leave the results to God.
But I think the key is you've created a clear line of right from wrong. If you acquiesce in the name of trying to reach them with the gospel, you've actually eradicated a level of understanding of right from wrong because you haven't taken the stand. So this is much more than a holiday at the house. This is the potential for this person to have a homecoming to the God who created them, that if you blur that line, you condemn them to think it's somehow appropriate or right.
You're helping them justify their sin.
Yeah.
And I think, and perhaps when
And the
you're
gospel's
talking
not
to
about
them-
justifying your sin. It's
No,
repenting
not.
of it.
Yeah. Right.
And there's got to be a sense in which this should not be the first conversation that you have with
Yeah,
your
hopefully it's
child.
not. Hopefully it's not.
Yeah.
Right. But and I think you do approach it from a gospel perspective. You say, we love you too much to let you to do that. We want you to repent. We want you to turn to Christ. We don't want to do anything that says to you that the way you're living now is okay.
And understand, in our world, there's so many different times in which the world doesn't do this. For example, drug users, Philadelphia. let's make sure they have clean needles.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's the
a
idea
similar
of-
principle. I
Yeah,
mean,
so
really.
let's facilitate something that's killing you, that's showing
So
you're
it'll
not
kill you more
valuable.
slowly,
Yeah, you're
right?
not that. And people go, well, but if you don't do that, they might kill themselves. And go, here's the deal. I'm responsible for what I do, not for what they do. So therefore, if they choose to take that action, that's on them. I can't say you're valuable and precious. Oh, by the
here's a
way,
clean
here's a needle.
Right.
Yeah, and so the idea, and being a Philadelphia family, part of the family, you just go, that's absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't work. But that's the world people live in, so they think the Christian should accommodate it.
Well, and that goes back to what is love. Love is making the person feel good.
Yeah.
And no, it's not. It's speaking truthfully to them, and then not determining whether or not you love them based on how they respond.
And there's a sense that you're held hostage by what someone might do, right? I mean, I think that's one of the arguments that we've heard before is, well, if you don't do this, that person could end up killing themselves. And so you're being forced to choose, do I say no or do I allow them to kill themselves? So how do you navigate that kind of response or mechanism?
Or we can't, if you don't let us stay together in the same bedroom, then this is the last Christmas you'll see us.
right,
I mean, that's
Blackmail.
That's emotional
Blackmail.
blackmail.
Emotional
I mean, it's
blackmail,
emotional
yeah.
blackmail.
I think it's a mature understanding of a victimhood culture, that people don't take personal responsibility, but they can blame somebody else. Next generation is, oh, since you won't do this, then I'll do this. So first of all, I'm not to be held responsible. It's because of the way I was brought up or what this person said to me or the environment that I was in. When that matures, it comes to the point that I not only believe that myself, but I actually hold you accountable. If you do this, I proactively say, if you do this, then I'm going to do this. So now all of a sudden, not only are you a victim, but you're a professional victim. You're starting to manipulate. And we see this actually in our country today where people go, this is what you're doing. I'm going to go to a company and do a shakedown of the company because you're making us do this, or I hold you responsible for what happened 400 years ago.
Right, rainbow
Wait a
coalition.
minute here. All that stuff is an outgrowth of people not taking personal responsibility, and it grows up into being malformed, represented in all sorts of these cultural
Well, we know of
levels.
ministries that use that leverage, right? That if you don't affirm these people on their side, that they will end up killing themselves. And so our ministry is to help you see that it's okay to be this
or that
way.
they might reject the church if
Right.
you don't
Affirm them where they're at.
affirm them where they are. And
Yes, and a sincere pastor who's got a huge heart, who struggles with this understanding, can unwittingly lean into that
Oh, yeah.
and become manipulated, and his ministry will be destroyed.
Right.
So therefore, you have got to stand on the conviction of what is true, what you're responsible for, and you're not responsible for other people and how they might respond to it. Because if you start playing that game, eventually you will become somebody who does not represent God.
I think that it's important to not let your anger drive you in this.
Yeah.
For example, if a person does do emotional blackmail, that would be very angering, right? And so therefore I would respond by the silent treatment, not talking to that person for months, years, or whatever.
Yeah.
No, it's going to be incumbent upon me to take the stand that I'm taking and then do everything in my power to reconnect and maintain a connection, to communicate my love, to talk to that person, still try to be an influence, be in whatever I can to be Christ to them in any circumstance, but not cross the line that I can.
well, and in the end, the Holy Spirit may open their eyes and
That's
save
right.
them, and then they will look back and then they will say, "Man, you did the right thing, but you never gave up on me.
Never gave up on me."
And they won't have that story if they become a
If you
Christian,
capitulate,
right? If they become a Christian and then they look back and they were like, "My parents lied to me. They told me this was okay." Think about that scenario, right?
And I do think there's a distinction. Let's say somebody who's lost, doesn't know Christ at all. There's a way you approach them, and I think Christ models that, giving them the truth in love. Then there's the religious lost, the person who goes to church all the time and they go, "Man, you guys are way too uptight. You guys need to just love people." And if they name the name of Christ, I bring much more heat with them.
that's a different scenario.
It's a different
Yes, it's a
scenario
different
because
scenario.
now they could be a make-believer. And that kind of confusion has run a lot of people shipwrecked. That somebody who's a pastor who now advocates for this view of sexuality. So somebody's born gay and they become a Christian. Oh, so they're in the category of gay Christian. And so, yeah, they should be married because that's how God made them. And so therefore, as long as they're faithful in that, that's a biblical marriage. And we know of people like that. We would say...
We know people who are teaching that.
We know people who are teaching it. We know people that are near us.
Yeah.
And so the point is that we go, no. That person's wrong, that pastor, and he'll be held accountable to that. And you have to be clear with people on that this is sinful and wrong, and you'll be held accountable, because this is absolutely contrary, clearly and easily contrary to the Bible.
Paul specifically tells you to separate from such a person.
That's
if a person is naming the name of Christ and they are living in sexual sin, Paul says you shouldn't even eat with that person.
That's right.
You shouldn't have.
Yep.
You should not.
It's completely different than a non-Christian.
Correct.
Totally. Yeah,
Correct.
very different.
Well, but
Yeah.
I would say, Larry, if it's a situation where it's a family member, you're not going to be able to 100% cut yourself off from that person. You know, let's say you're cousins and you're being invited to grandma's, right? Everybody's going.
Well, I think the bottom line there is you don't. When Paul was saying you don't eat with the person, you don't fellowship with the person as if they are a believer.
That's it.
Right. So you don't treat them like
There's
nothing wrong.
It's sitting at table with
Yeah.
them in agreement. It's saying we're in fellowship where there's nothing going on. That's not the situation. It's a circumstance. If you're at grandma's house and you're there, it's going the extra mile to be friendly to that person, to be polite to that person, to talk to them, to ask them about their life, ask them what's going on, to show them that I don't have animosity towards you. I don't hate you. I love you. You're my family member. You're my cousin, and I consider you a friend or a cousin or whatever it might be. And you demonstrate that you're not going to do as the world would do and just cut it off and break, and you don't talk to each other for years and years. I think that's worse.
Yes, although I think there could be some circumstances where you would need to do that. If this person is advocating for their position continually, particularly if they're advocating for it as being in sync with Christianity and those kind of things, that's got to be dealt with forthrightly.
Yeah, there's a level of complexity.
It
As much as it relies on
Yeah.
you live at peace with all men.
Right.
But sometimes it doesn't. And if that person decides to give you the cold shoulder, that's up to them. But you're not going to acquiesce.
You don't have to chase after them necessarily.
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, good. So let's move this discussion maybe in a little bit different direction. And so, Dan, here's a couple questions for you. You know, Pride Month will soon be on us once again. Here's a scenario that maybe some Christians may face in their communities or in their neighborhoods. But suppose your HOA, your homeowners association, is investing your fees in a homeowners fund for Pride Month and social activities. How might we respond? How should we think this through?
Yeah, I think one of the big things to remember is that people in your community have various different beliefs. And so this could kind of hover between attend to approve. The first thing I would want to do is go to my HOA and express that this is a violation of what you believe. You're being asked to approve of something that cuts at the very DNA of your understanding of who God is and how life works. And so I would come to them being respectful, talking to them knowing that they have a different worldview. I might come prepared with alternate ideas of different things you can do in order to develop camaraderie or celebrate days. But then ultimately, as the conversation progresses or digresses, depending on how it is, it could be a situation where I go, I don't want to approve of this. I'm not a part of this. And if they say, well, we're the HOA, we make the decision, then you're going to have to make a decision. And I would say at that point, you need to really look at, I need to consider a different neighborhood. Because
Wait, so you're saying move?
Yes.
If it gets that,
yes.
That's a huge cost.
If it gets to the point that your monies are going to the promotion of something that you believe is in rebellion to the God of the universe, and by living there, I'm going to be under the table advocating because I'm giving money. Yes, you should consider that because
I agree. That's a big one, man.
Yeah. Now, if somebody goes, no, I really want to move through this because I'm going to keep standing. Well, that's fine. But what you can't do is go, okay, no problem. Everybody has apples, oranges, no problem here. You can't do that. Because everybody in that neighborhood, at least in the HOA, knows you're a Christian and has opposed this. And then you go radio silent. They go, your religion, your belief is really not very valuable. Because if somebody asks, somebody asks you to promote something that other people, like let's say you're promoting drug needles, giving out needles to people, you go, wait a minute, I'm not putting money in to give needles out to people or to do drag shows in the neighborhood in the common area. At some point, you've got to go, I'm not going to live here. And I think that's something, I think Christians who are following Christ, you're going to take some heat, but you're going to give a clear understanding of what God understands sexuality to be, so that at some point, crisis, people go, my life is in the toilet. My relationships are terrible. I believe this. Could I be wrong? Then they're going to think, who can help me? Yeah. And it's not going to be the guy who acquiesced. It's going to be the guy who took the stand.
Yeah, you're right, because no one will know who he is. He's the silent
guy.
So
you think there's an approach you could take that, because in the part of Atlanta that we live in, North Atlanta, there's a lot of diversity, different ethnicities, different religions in a lot of the neighborhoods, in our neighborhood. So going to the person and saying, okay, this is something that, as you said, offends me as a Christian. Would you put on an event that you knew offended this group, whom we have a lot of in this neighborhood? Would you put on an event? In other words, frame it that way.
Yeah,
saying
for
it,
sure. Because we have people, my neighborhood, we have people who do the flag. But there's a difference.
You mean the pride flag?
Pride flag.
Yeah. That's on their private property, right?
That's right.
Right.
It's what they represent to be true. It's not an HOA. It's not something I'm giving into. That's no problem. They can do on private property whatever they want in that regard. I would say that represents their belief.
But if they run it up the flagpole at the clubhouse, then that's...
And your money is going to support it.
Paid for the flag and the pole.
It's not only approve it, now you're moving toward advocacy as a group. And if you're a subset of that group, you're part of the advocacy.
So I want to be clear. Are you saying that a Christian who cannot get the HOA to move off of that position should move? Yeah. Should move?
No, I would say this.
You're asking must move.
You better have a really good reason to stay.
Okay,
it's going to cost me a fortune to sell my house right now.
I'm thinking of a circumstance recently where it's been revealed that USAID has been supporting all kinds of,
sure.
And using our taxpayer money to support all kinds of values that we don't share. I don't have any power in that other than the power of the vote. And, fortunately now...
You could move to another country.
We're not paying taxes.
Right, but you're just going to move into someplace else where there's that same problem. I don't know that you can run away from the problem every time.
It's worse most other places.
But I think if you can move towards saying, all right, well, if you all in this HOA are not going to move off of this, I would say now it's time for you to start getting on the board of the HOA and move yourself into a position of leadership.
I think that's totally appropriate. And helping them understand, because I think most HOAs are going along to get along.
Yeah.
And so you're helping them understand there's a price tag to this. This is what it is for me. And it could be that you go, just like in government, we've got guys who are actively involved in governmental things because at some point they said, I can't deal with this. And somebody said from our church, well, why don't you get involved then? Stop complaining, get off the bleachers, get on the field. Yeah. And we've got guys who are actively engaged in doing it. So absolutely. So I don't say you take your ball and go home, you post flag, now you're going to be leaving your, this house for sale.
As a last resort.
But the idea is that if it's not on the table, then I don't think this matters to you. And if it doesn't matter to you as a Christian, then I go, what do you believe?
Yeah. And another less drastic step would be to talk to some of your neighbors. Maybe they might not be followers of Christ.
They might not be willing to speak up.
But they can still understand this is not right, and you might be able to get a grassroots coalition without even having to get on the board to affect some change.
For sure.
There's other options too.
Yes, correct.
Good discussion. All right, Dan, here's another one. Maybe not so much about our communities that we live in, but local businesses that we frequent that seem today, many of these businesses are promoting the LGBTQ lifestyle. And we see commercials, it seems like daily, that affirms that. And we even see stores like Publix and Target promoting this in the merchandise that they sell. And it's right in our face sometimes. What should our response be to these companies or stores or even restaurants? Should we boycott them? Should we talk to the manager? Do we write letters? What do we do? And then how do we go about doing it in the spirit and the heart behind that?
Yeah, I would say this is firmly implanted in the attend or involvement kind of dynamic. But it's informed by our conscience that if I believe as a Christian I shouldn't shop at Target because they're pushing a particular ideology, then don't violate that. If you feel that in order to glorify the Lord, everything you do, you're supposed to glorify the Lord. And you go, when I go in there, I feel like I'm defaming the name of Christ. Don't do it. Another Christian can go, I don't think that at all. I don't like it. I don't support it. I don't stand for it. But you know what? I'm a steward. And they've got a great deal on that. At that point, you got to go, okay, I understand there's differences. Just like Paul would in 1 Corinthians 8 through 10 of meat being offered to idol, recognizing that. Strong, weak Christians in Romans chapter 14 and 15, the idea there that people are different. So just simply attending or being involved does not therefore make me guilty. So the other challenge is that the measure of support that corporations are given to this, I don't know where you would shop, because at some point, I know the argument used to be, I don't shop anywhere that they sell liquor because I don't want to support people getting drunk. Well, everybody sells liquor.
Yeah, good luck with that.
And again, it's kind of an inverted thing of responsibility. A Christian isn't responsible for somebody else buying liquor at a store that you shop. You're not responsible for that. They're responsible. And so I think that you've got to be very, very careful as a Christian not to think you're strong when you're actually weak. And you've got to flex that muscle. So I would say this is firmly involved in the attending or involvement, that people, sincere Christians, can see something, the same thing, very, very different, and both honor the Lord.
And then over time, your opinion on business X might change, right? Like I recently, a year ago, got rid of Disney Plus, mainly because the message is just so overt, so constant. It's if they're banging the drum all day, 24/7, 365 with this agenda. And so I'm just tired of it. And I've walked away from some things. I'm a big sports guy on ESPN Plus, which I got with that. I can't read the really excellent analytical articles that I love, is what it is. Target used to be a lot more in your face. They backed off from some of that. They're less public anyways. Their pride stuff is in the back. I think they've even walked back from boys and girls in opposite bathrooms. And so I still don't shop there, but I wouldn't have a problem doing so. And so things change, right? We always need to be engaged and discerning. And Ken might have the whole Disney Plus package, and that's okay too. So I can't hold him to my standard.
Yeah, and I think there are different levels of this too. Like you're talking about, I think the difference between Disney Plus and ESPN is that Disney Plus targets children.
Correct.
And they are seeking to indoctrinate children with these messages. I would have an easier time saying I'm not going to give them any money versus not shopping at Target, for example.
That's right. Very sticky circumstance here is because, for example, Disney owns ESPN
and
ABC,
true,
and Hulu.
Yeah. Well, and you got to know all these interconnected things
in order. Hulu, so that I can watch ESPN Plus, so that I can see.
You still got to give Disney
Cup.
Money.
I'm ended up giving Disney money, but I never watched Disney Plus because I, out of conscience, will not watch Disney Plus. But they're getting my money.
They're getting your money.
So I'm compromising a little bit, but then I'm holding the line a little bit on that.
That's where you start off. Pray for wisdom. Pray for discernment. Then you assess your motives, and then you maybe engage the store. It's kind of like all this stuff. You just don't sit back and lob cannons or grenades, but you go to the store and say, I'm a follower of Christ, and this is really offensive. You engage with that. You make it an opportunity, not just pull the pin and throw it over. So I think all of this has a gradual kind of degree of intensity. Mm-hmm. You just don't start with the 357. Right. You pray for wisdom, assess your motives, engage in conversation, take a stand, and da-da-da-da-da. It kind of goes down.
So do you think it's ever appropriate to push back on the person whose conscience says, I'm not going to shop at Target, for example, with something like, well, where do you plan to shop that this is not an issue? In other words, point out to them that, there's this issue with Target. Look at the webpage of Walmart. I bet you they've got support for LGBT.
I would do that very carefully.
But I mean, and maybe if you're friendly enough.
If that person is, it's a matter of their conscience, and you start really pushing and poking on that, you could get that person to violate their conscience, and that's the thing Paul warns against. So I really
think you want to try to maybe inform their conscience rather than pushing them to violate it.
I would hope you would build a relationship built around something other than that first.
That's right.
And then go to that.
And you might not even have to go there unless they are making it a test of fidelity for everybody else.
It would certainly it would certainly relate to how your relationship is. However, the distinction needs to be made that person probably isn't thinking it's sinful. It's just they don't want to do it. So there's a distinction when Paul's talking about an offense, someone, whether it's the person offered meat and they see you, and if you eat that meat, they think it's okay, and they think it's sinful.
And they violate their conscience.
Yeah,
then.
that's a violation of conscience. Not I'm uncomfortable, or I don't like it, or I wouldn't do it. So that's an enormous distinction. And if somebody believes that in something that another sincere Christian doesn't believe, to Larry's point, I want them to flex that muscle a little bit more. And I would ask them questions. Well, where do you shop that you don't think
that you're not supporting this
in any way, shape, or
But
form?
I think it goes to what Larry was saying. Is that person being disruptive to the fellowship and going around telling people?
Yeah, anyone that shops at
Have you
Target's
seen
wrong.
Brett? Brett
Yeah.
goes to Target. How can he call himself a Christian? He shops at Target.
Because I take the books and I turn them around in their style.
Yeah, but the person who is doing that actively, that's the person that I would engage far more pointedly.
That's correct.
on that.
Yeah, and that's why we can't, there's no prescription, specific prescription for how to deal with it. There's nothing like, that's as you're in relationship with people. Sometimes as you spend time with the Lord and you're sensitive to the leading of the Spirit, sometimes you're going to turn the heat up when in other times you wouldn't necessarily. So I think you trust the Lord for the outcome and just be ready.
And I think the important thing to realize is that, pushing that red card around at Target is not tantamount to going to a same-sex wedding.
That's
They're two different scenarios.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, very different. Yeah, very different.
Well, good. That's a great conversation. We talked a little bit about Disney and its indoctrination to our young people. Dan, this is another question that relates in some capacity. The LGBTQ effort is making its way, unfortunately, into our classrooms. And what would you say to a parent or a student if they were required to listen or participate in any kind of LGBTQ affirming curriculum?
Yeah, I would say this is not an attend. I don't think it's necessarily an advocate at the point, but I think it's the idea of approval. And the reason why I would say that is because parents partner with education. And so therefore, if somebody makes that call as a parent, you have the responsibility to make sure you're the primary person for educating your son or daughter. And if they're educating them in something that is wrong, it's contrary to reality. Just like 2 + 2 is 4. It's not 5. And let's say a teacher is hired that is teaching, 2 + 2 can be whatever you want it to be. You go, wait a minute, this is my child
And that's
in
not
this
as crazy
context.
as you may think.
Oh, yeah, that's not.
Just keep in mind, you can do that with a child who is under 18. But once they're above 18 or college, once they're in college, they're not going to let you do that. So keep that in mind.
Then we'll just carve out the first.
Yeah.
So I'd start, again, I'd pray for wisdom. I'd pray to be respectful. I would engage the teacher if this is a subset. So talk to the teacher because it could be in isolation. If it's not, then I go, okay, I'm going to talk to the principal. And if it's still not getting anywhere that way and they're pushing particularly that thing, again, respectfully, understandably, recognizing that they might have a worldview that is not informed at all with the Bible. So I'm trying to engage them in a way that's respectful. My role as the parent, I want to support all of that stuff, but you may need to escalate it to the school board, engaging on that, and eventually you might need to leave that school system. That might be legitimate, but I think Christians, being salt and light in the world, need to kind of walk up that ladder in a respectful way. It's hard. I get it. Your kids are involved, especially younger kids. I mean, you're ready, pulling pins and going crazy. But I think you need to do it knowing that not only you're trying to take a stand and represent the gospel, but you're also modeling for your child. That's right. If you're talking bad about the teacher, about the principal, how could they do this? Who do they think they are? Your kid hears that. Now your kid thinks that's the way to oppose the world in my life, in my future. And so therefore, you've got to be very mindful. You're leading in all of these things. Make sure you lead with proper motives, proper respect at the proper level of the authorities that you are answerable to while you're in that context, but maybe you need to be not in that context.
And that goes to show how incredibly important it is where you buy a house.
Yeah.
My wife and I are doing premarital counseling with over the last 6 months, 3 different couples. And we talked to all of them. Where are you going to live? Where are you going to live? What are you going to do about school? And if they're homeschoolers, okay, live wherever you want, basically. But if you're considering public school as an option, or you don't have the money for private, then you must consider. I've shared with them where we live. We did put our kids in public school as they got older. We would have never done so in DeKalb County. And in our county, when they did sex ed at the middle school level, they let us parents know, and your kid can completely opt out. And in a very marginalizing way. So your kid's not the loser kid, right, who doesn't attend. That wouldn't happen in other counties. Those
Right.
types
You do
of
have to
things.
be
So you
careful.
have to consider this.
School systems vary.
Yeah, so you don't buy a nice house and end up hating the school district, and then you're like, now I'm going to lose 100K. I got to get out of here because we can't homeschool or whatever. It's a big deal.
And we've as a family, 7 kids, so we've done homeschool, we've done private school, we've done public school.
And the hybrid.
Yes, right.
Just like
and
us,
so
we've done it all.
So you have to be mindful. You never take time off. We always value, every year we'd say, okay, what is the next step that is best for our child? Recognizing we go to the parent nights at the public school, we engage, all the teachers know us. I'm actually on a parent advisory committee, which I'd rather not be, but we're evaluating right now actually the policy, the policy of discipline, all that stuff in the school. I have other things I can do, but there's a respect there of being involved and engaging that when something happens, because it will, I want people in the higher ups to know me, that I'm supporting them as much as I possibly can.
And that you don't just poke your head up when something's wrong.
No.
Right.
We had to talk with our kids about disagreements with adults. Because, in your life, you're going to have disagreements over doctrines in the church with other Christians. You're going to have disagreements over politics. You're going to have disagreements over values. And we've had multiple talks with our kids that, hey, if you're ever in a situation where you're in the presence of an adult and that person says something which that you don't personally or your family doesn't agree with the area of politics, doctrine, or whatever, your first responsibility to that adult is to show them respect. You are not to be that precocious child who makes a scene because they're wrong and they're bad. If there's something that you're not sure is correct and you need to take a stand on it and tell them, I don't agree with this particular you do it in a respectful way. If the teacher really pushes back on you or the adult really pushes back on you, that's when you say, I really need you to talk to my parents. I think we need to have an opportunity. So I'm going to talk to my parents tonight about this and have them call you or whatever. But you do it in such a way it's not a threat.
That's good
It's
advice.
It's not angry.
That's
it's
right.
just I don't think I agree with this, so I need my parents involved.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
It's the James, quick to listen, slow to speak.
Right.
It's the deliberate response. The other thing I've told my kids is, because this person isn't necessarily out to get you, serve them well by not making a statement but asking a question. So when Christ asks a question, the person has to divide their energy up from listening to what the opposition says and then formulating an answer, versus if you make a statement, all the energy can go to coming back at you with an answer, and that's how it can escalate. So you serve somebody well by entertaining your proposition, by asking questions. Now you have to do some work there. Think about, well, what about in this situation? Or how would you apply this in this situation? So that person gives them an opportunity to retreat, adjust, whatever, and that's a form of respect.
And I think that is easy to say.
Sure.
Very difficult to do. We're training kids to do evangelism, and it's a very difficult thing to get them to know what question to ask, and because you get emotional in those
fired
circles.
up.
You get gunched up is a great word.
Yeah.
Your mouth gets dry, your hands shake, the adrenaline is pumping, and you don't know what to say. So practicing that is a technique, and talking to your kids about what will you do if Mrs. What's her name at the school starts talking about Heather has 2 mommies, right? Yeah. What is the thing you're going to say in those circumstances? Or what is the thing you're not going to say in those circumstances?
Yeah, and we've done in the car, I'll have situations, I'll propose them after dinner. What about this issue? What would you do? You take advantage of those times in which you're engaging your kids, and again, you're flexing that muscle. You can't be passive in parenting. You've never been able to, but you certainly can't today. Because as we even talk about, there's dynamics to conversations that your kids, you don't want them to get lost in the turns. And sometimes you go, no, this is the answer here. Oh, that circumstance, you need to think about this, and this.
And an excellent way to do that is the leveraging the everyday things that you do. We would watch TV together as a family, and if something came up that was an ethical question, we watched a lot of Star Trek and shows like that where they were always dealing with philosophical or ethical or political things, we'd stop it and we'd talk about it. We'd say, what would you do in that circumstance? What would be the Christ-like thing to do? Or what would your answer be in even divorcing it from any issue of where Christ is or not, but you're giving your kid an opportunity to flex that muscle that you're talking about and to think, okay, how would I answer that? And how would I do it in a respectful way? How would I do it in a thoughtful way? And, some people might think that that's over the top and nerdy, but that's what we're called to do as parents.
And as a parent, don't feel like, well, I don't know all those answers. Go, oh, that's great. Let's kind of keep the conversation going. Go and find somebody who maybe is more mature, or maybe a pastor, and go, what would you think? Where's this Bible speak to this? And just recognize it not as like a sitcom, like a 30-minute thing, you have the proposition, the problem, and then it's solved. No. It's a conversation.
And
this could last for a long time. That's right. And go,
remember that we were talking about the other night? I was reading on that.
That's right.
It came up.
And I think I was wrong. I think I was wrong. I think that I've got to reconsider that. I know. That's why I bring it up.
Ken's a beast.
Oh, that's good stuff. Thank you, guys. That's good. Good stuff as parents to deal with this as well. All right, let's move to the next one. Larry, back to you. Okay. The situation here is you assume you have a daughter. She's gay. She's celebrating her birthday. She's asked you to help her throw a party, which includes inviting many of her friends who are lesbian or homosexual and affirming of that lifestyle. Should you do this? Are you affirming and promoting her lifestyle by doing this?
Yeah,
How do we think this through?
I would put this in the category of basic attendance, right? Where my attendance and my help with this doesn't necessarily communicate that I am approving of or advocating for this position. There could be an exception to that, which I'll talk about in a minute, but I think, we were just talking about parenting, and I think one of the biblical principles of parenting, Colossians 3:21, is fathers do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. And we've talked about a lot of issues around this table today that you have to take a stand on with your child in a way that they are not going to like it. And you have to. So I don't think it behooves us then not to make every single thing a test of not to have to fidelity to us as parents.
Not everything's an argument.
Yeah, like not make everything an argument, right? And never show them any grace. That it could unnecessarily, I think, provoke them. So I think you don't have to approve your daughter's lifestyle, whether it's gay and lesbian or anything else, to have a birthday party for her and let her invite the friends that she wants to invite. I think that could actually be a good witness, because I know she knows that you don't approve of it, and I bet you she's told her friends that you don't approve of it. So if they see you willing to give her a birthday party, that actually might mean something in the long term to some of those folks. So I think it'd be just fine to do that. Now, the only caveat would be if she decides to turn the party into a celebration of the LGBT. If there's going to be a rainbow cake and the flags and in order to participate, you kind of have to buy into the whole deal. That'd be a different situation. But I think we've mentioned this, or Dan's mentioned this a minute ago. But as far as is possible, live at peace. And so I think it's one of those situations.
So if it turns into the flag and all that, it's now advocating. You're now actually facilitating her advocating.
Right. If she makes this party a celebration not only of her birthday but of other things, then you have to decide whether you can buy into that.
Now, what do you say? Somebody comes to you and says, Pastor Larry, I really think for me this is an issue of conscience. And as you talk to the person, you realize they're not being concerned to be drawn into a same-sex relationship because they're throwing a birthday party, because that would be sin. They're not, but they just don't like it to the point that they use the cover of it's against my conscience.
Yeah.
How do you walk them through that?
I mean, I think you have to look at why you don't like it, right? I mean, do you not like it because it's an offense to God? Or do you not like it because this is not what I had in mind for my child and I wish it was different?
In other words, an offense to you.
Offense to me, right. And so I think that's the thing. And like you say, the weaker brother argument is you don't do something because you're afraid it will make the other person sin. So if you have this party for your daughter, is that going to cause anybody else to sin? Is it going to cause you to sin, like you said? And it's probably not, if your conscience is well informed. So I think you have to examine whether or not, I just don't want to do something for her because I don't like the way that she's living and it makes me mad.
And this sin among, any other, can often evoke a visceral response, particularly in our demographic and our age. Our children who are 20 and 25, who've been raised in a much more saturated atmosphere with this, it's They don't quite understand what it's been like the last, 4,000 years in regards to this particular sin. And so that was an issue I struggled with early, just the visceral disgust I had towards same-sex activity that had almost nothing or probably zero to do with an offense against the holy God and his created order. And we need to be able to separate those two. And
Well,
I'm
I
not
think
saying
I think that visceral reaction comes from it being a violation of the created order, and I think the reason that it is not that way among younger people is because the LGBTQ lobby has done such a good job of separating that from
that's right.
what they're trying to push.
Destigmatizing.
But it can't just be, what was the word
Yeah.
you just used slightly under your breath? It was good. It gives me the heebie-jeebies or it creeps me out or something
it
like
makes my skin crawl.
Makes my skin crawl. But okay, that's good. But that shouldn't keep me from going to my 21-year-old son's birthday party with most of his friends who are gay because he's gay.
Yeah, so in other words, if somebody says, well, that's awfully bigoted of you to make your skin crawl, go, no. It should make my skin crawl.
And yours too.
So I kind of hike through that territory emotionally. I don't park there. I should hike through that every time. But that's not going to be where I live because then I'm rescued by recognizing, if it weren't for the grace of God, where would I be? All of that stuff. So I think that idea of anger, where is that anger centered? Is it centered in you're offending God or it just gives me the heebie-jeebies?
Correct. And that's what I was
a
trying to
big
make
deal.
the point.
Yeah,
earlier,
I think
not
there's
well.
legitimacy to that. I think that's similar though to the issue with abortion, right? They don't want you to see what an abortion looks like because it is so offensive. They've done a good job of separating what actually goes on in an abortion from the idea that it's health care. I think we have the same kind of scenario with, they've done a good job of separating what does it actually mean to be involved in a sexual relationship with another man if you're a man.
Yeah, and so it's not a monolithic feeling. There's these feelings, plural, that you're going to have that's right and good and appropriate. The key is evaluating your motives in that and where you land.
That's right. All right, Ken, back to you. We've just come through a political season here, and who to vote for president was determined, obviously. But maybe we think about a scenario that would maybe help us to walk through some of these filters we've been talking about. So the situation would be you have two people to vote for. One's a gay Republican, the one's a straight Democrat. How would we think through this from a biblical truth and love standpoint, if at all?
So just because one is a Republican and one is a Democrat doesn't necessarily tell me anything about their particular political view. I think this is going to be, in my opinion, a matter of conscience. It's going to boil down to a matter of conscience. I do believe it can go beyond that, but it just depends on the circumstance. So this is one of those, and a lot of people don't like it, but I'm just going to say it depends. I believe that if a person, a candidate is a conservative, meaning that that person's politically conservative, is going to consider freedom, liberty, economic freedom as a value, and that person happens to be homosexual, but they keep his or her homosexuality relatively private, doesn't overtly advocate for what we call the homosexual agenda. This person is a lesser evil, if you will, than a person who's a flat out leftist, but straight, right? A leftist is going to be advocating policies that do far more damage to the economy, the culture, the security of the country. Those are things we have to think about as well. And so if it comes down to a choice between the lesser of two evils,
And it always does.
it always usually does, because no one is not evil, right? We all have that. I am going to choose the one that is going to best represent the multiple values that I have from a political candidate. And so I'm going to think about the economy. I'm going to think about culture, and I'm going to think about security and defense and all of those things. And so I may have to hold my nose and vote for a person that I don't agree with on a particular issue or place where they are in their own life. For example, Donald Trump. I'm going to vote for that over the opposition because the opposition represents a far worse choice.
Yeah.
So quality over person then? Is that what you're really saying?
It depends.
Okay.
If that person is, and let's say I know them personally, and I know that they do not have any integrity, then no, it would be person, because I know that person. And that's been the case. I've known several politicians in my career. I had the opportunity to get to know a lot of politicians, and some of them were really solid, good people that had a D next to their name, and others were snakes in the grass with an R next to their name. And you just get to know them, and you know who they are. So that would be personal. But most of the time we don't know these candidates. We just have what they have on their website or whatever.
So you would say, though, the lens, if we're thinking attend, the idea of attend, approve, or advocate, this is firmly entrenched in the attend, because you're not approving of everything. You can't,
Right.
Because and you certainly wouldn't. You're not advocating. You're not signed up going door to door. So there's a sense that you're involved. You're simply that first level at this.
If I do decide to go door to door for that Republican who is a homosexual, that would be a tough decision to make. But if I were faced with Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders on the other side, and I have to, I mean, it's like when Mitt Romney was running. He's Mormon.
Let's use Jimmy Carter. Let's use Jimmy Carter, because I think he's even better, because
I didn't vote for the guy. I was too young.
Well,
really?
Okay. Well, back.
You look so much older, Ken.
I was in college at the time.
The first presidential election I voted in was 1980, which was between Carter and Reagan.
Ran in 76 as
Yeah,
well.
but then he ran again to re-elect.
I was too young. I was only
in 76, but you weren't in 80, right?
No, I didn't vote for him in 80.
He voted when he was 14.
Everyone voted for Reagan.
But I think the point is that the people who said Carter's a Christian, because he espoused being a Christian, let's vote for him.
Right.
The problem is he was horrific as far as his ability to actually lead in policy. So it's not a monolithic thing you've got to engage, but I think most of the time it lives at an intend level. You're involved, lesser of two evils. And so there are certainly times in which the platform, Democratic platform, you go, this is so incredibly evil. The person's aligned with it. So now even if they're a good leader, I can't. And that's something that people of good conscience and sincere people who are following Christ need to work out. But I think we should push and pull on that as Christians, but recognize just because I have voted for a person doesn't mean I'm advocating for their entire worldview.
And the whole thing about party platforms is somewhat of a nard, because the farther you get down into local politics, the less that the party platform really bears on that person. And then you're going to be, it depends on where you live, you're going to have this circumstance. Let's say, for example, I lived in New York. Nobody in the Republican Party is going to run for anything. So your real elections are in the primaries. And so now what you're doing is you're voting for, a perfect example is Los Angeles with the current mayor versus the guy who was running against her. Caruso was running against Bass. Caruso was really a Republican and Democrat close because he knew he couldn't run as a Republican and win in Los Angeles County. Or Los Angeles City. There's no way that could happen. So I may find myself in a situation where the only candidates that I can vote for are Democrats.
That have a chance of winning.
And that have a chance of winning.
Our daughter and son-in-law have that same scenario in Brooklyn, New York. Yeah,
correct.
They both registered as Democrats because to vote in the Republican primary is kind of pointless.
It's not so far removed. This is a circumstance right now going on in Gwinnett County because Gwinnett has gone completely blue. A lot of the Republican politicians said, I either just get out of politics altogether and have no influence whatsoever, or I go Democrat and run and try to primary out this person whom I totally
wolf in sheep's clothing tactic, kind of.
Yeah.
But like you say, you have to. The Democratic Party particularly is very strict on enforcing adherence to their platform, but you don't really get to that level until you get to national election levels, like Congress people and senators.
Well, and I think even higher state.
Or higher state.
Higher state levels. State Senate, you're going to get into a lot of trouble if you try to.
You can't buck
You can't play that.
You can't be pro-life, for example.
But in school boards and city councils, I had no problem with that.
So what is your opinion on, okay, that neither of these is acceptable, I just shouldn't vote at all? I mean, is that a legitimate?
I don't think that we as Christians have the right to not vote at all. I think it's our responsibility to vote and to vote the lesser of two evils in that case.
So would option be to write in a name?
Write in a name if you think there's somebody better, or vote for a third party if you think that third party is better. There's always going to be somebody who's the lesser of two evils. Not voting at all, I think, abdicates your responsibility.
Yeah, I write in Ken's name regularly.
And that would be the lesser of all evils.
Yes, let's go. Good stuff. Well, fellas, we've had a great conversation here over a number of topics. I'll just throw it out to any closing thoughts or comments as we've wrapped up our number of items.
I mean, the encouragement that engendered this whole mission, 2 years ago, right? When we started this in response to the local church, and then the paper we wrote and the classes we taught, and now this is that it's important that we stay faithful to our King. He is faithful to us. We must not deviate. We will pay a price. Let's not be jerks about it. Let's not make it any more offensive than it needs to be, but we're not going to water anything down in our pursuit of Him and our faithfulness to Him.
And you have to take a stand on the issues that are the issues of your day. Mm-hmm. It's really easy to point out the sins of your ancestors and things like that.
That's right.
But nobody's going to take shots at you for that. But they are going to take shots at you over taking a stand for the pet sins of the day. And this is one of the biggest ones in our day.
And it's important to be informed. Read. Know what's going on. Don't just stick your head in the sand. Know what's going on. Find out. Get some news sources that you can trust. And read what's going on, read opinion columns, try to understand where people are coming from on various things. Read Christian writers with whom you disagree, those with whom you agree, and do comparisons. Talk to other people, get other people's opinions on things, learn and grow. That's the best way.
And I would say always have your mooring in Scripture. You're always regularly spending time in Scripture, so as you're kind of the laser is looking over the landscape as you're surveying things, as your radar sweep is kind of processing ideologies, you're always being informed based on what the Bible says. You're always being renewed in your mind, so you have a proper level of discernment, proper level of respect, proper level of understanding what love means when you're trying to express truth.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Well, guys, thank you again for the time you put into putting together your answers, for the great conversation. And we're thankful for you, too, that you've joined us here. We hope maybe this is the first of many conversations that we can have about the issues that we face today and how do we handle all this stuff with truth and love. And certainly from our standpoint, from a pastoral way, I think we would all agree that if you have questions about these things yourself or the issues that you may face in your own family, come talk to us. That's one of the roles that we play. We want to engage you in every possible part of your life and to encourage you as you think through these things biblically and work towards representing Christ in all that we do. So with that, we'll say goodbye and look forward to seeing you hopefully maybe next time.